I'd like to take a slightly different slant with the next question, or talk about a different medium. We just talked about largely film, but I imagine that when you're scoring a video game, it's a very different method that you have to go through because of the nature of the video game being dynamic, the changes that can happen, the interactivity with the user. So 3 of our panelists have done video games, so if you could each talk a little bit about your methodology for doing that. I'd like Chuck to start.
Sure.
Great.
Well, it's not linear.
Right.
That's number one, right?
Sure.
Yep.
So, thanks, man. So that it's interactive in many ways. So it needs, especially when we're doing a score or anything. It doesn't really need to be an orchestral score. It could be a rock piece or any whatever type of music you're doing. What we do, we do a lot of things, but we'll make it work with whatever event is happening on the screen at the time. Right. So there's lots of ways to go about doing that.
So basically, for scoring of games where it's different is they like you have the music has to span over maybe levels that are 45 minutes, and they give you 5 minutes to write, and that's it. So 5 minutes has got to turn into 45 minutes, and so the way we recorded, and every game's a little bit differently, but we recorded the Simpsons game, and we didn't do this so much with Warhawk. We did it differently, but Simpsons, we recorded everything separately, and Hans Zimmer does this with movies now, and some other composers as well. So you have more control over just the brass, just the strings, just the woodwinds, just whatever else you want to throw, and then they can take it and the music departments of Sony and EA and these other companies will make different mixes of your track. So on the game, it may sound completely different than how you wrote it, because you have to write it, totally all orchestrated out completely. But if you in your head all you heard the piece was mostly strings, and you have to throw in brass and other things because they need it, so they can edit it in 100 different ways.
A perfect example of that is one of our sports titles, our basketball game, NBA. We have a story mode for that game, and that's you can choose to play the game just in a regular style simulation basketball, or you can play a story mode and follow the life of what would be a basketball player from a rookie to when he makes it to the pros, and that whole story along there. So we had that part, the story mode, scored. And with we worked with a duo called MIDI Mafia. You guys know those guys out in New York, and what we had Michael Sandgren was a composer on it. We had him write the score for the story mode, and we had brought some of those elements to MIDI Mafia, which is a hip hop producer duo, and they took those elements and made their version of hip hop stuff based on those elements. So it brings kind of a synergy to both the story mode. So it creates a better overall rounded soundtrack. That's one way of doing it. Same thing with what Tim was saying with the Warhawk stuff. We'll have the composer write X amount of minutes, and then we'll take that based on what needs to be done with the interactivity, how it needs to be implemented in the game, and stretch it out longer so it has a lot more, I guess, interest over playing for many minutes. Versus hearing the same thing over and over again.
That's kind of interesting, and I remember, Sean, you once told me a story that ties in very nicely with this. When you were scoring one of the Batman video games, you had a fight scene between the Joker and Batman that had to happen. Could you talk a little bit about what you had to accommodate with that?
What we had to do there is it was actually Mr. Freeze and Batman, and they each guy had their own theme. But there was an underlying cue going on that was, the Batman sound. So the idea of this part that we're doing was you're fighting with Mr. Freeze, but if Mr. Freeze was winning, they wanted the cue to play more in Mr. Freeze's theme. If Batman was winning, more in his theme. But yet you have this continuous piece of music. So basically, I had to write a bunch of stems. So you had the main basis of the cue, and then all their different elements would come in, because it's all real time. You don't know when it's going to happen because it's based on the game. So it was very interesting, and I had to write it so that both themes would work together at the same time, just in case, because it's going to clash. So it was pretty cool. But you had to think way beyond just writing this cue. the other thing I wanted to say about writing for video games in general, what's really different about video games and say a TV show or movies, is when you're doing a TV show or a movie, you're writing to a scene. You're part of a bigger picture, so to speak. I mean, you have actors, you have dialogue. You're just kind of like another actor in the scene. You're a supporting role, basically. In a video game, I think the music plays. It's more of a starring performance. I mean, you have the game and you have music. I mean, there's not like all these other elements. So the music has to do. I think to me, it has to do a lot more work on its own and stand by itself a little bit better. Plus, it's going to loop. I kind of like. I look at it like it's like writing a song. You have to have the hook and all that, and not get bored. But that's my general take on it. Would you agree?
Yes.